Welcome. Tonight, we tackle a question central to biblical history. Was Moses African? The historical evidence may surprise you.
Look closely here. This passage describes the duties of the next ruler in the temple rituals.
The truth is this: Moses was a black prophet. Moses is Israel. Israel is in the Middle East. Say that again slowly. Let it sit with you. Now, before you scroll away, before you say, "Here we go again," I want you to stay with me. Because this is not about argument. This is not about fighting anybody's religion or pulling anybody's faith apart. This is about truth. Simple, plain, honest truth. The kind that has been sitting right in front of us for thousands of years, but got buried under maps, under paintings, under centuries of somebody else telling us who these people were. So let us start from the beginning. The Middle East. When you hear those words today, what do you see in your mind? You probably see a dry desert region somewhere between Europe and Asia. You probably see people with light brown skin, Arabic robes, oil fields, maybe war on a news channel. That is what we have been shown. That is the image that got built into our heads. But that image is not the original picture. Here is what people do not talk about enough. The land we call the Middle East today was not always separated from Africa. Not geographically, not culturally, not racially. The Sinai Peninsula, which is where Egypt connects to what we now call the Middle East, is literally a land bridge, a physical connection between Africa and Asia. For thousands of years, there was no hard border, no wall, no separate continent. People walked back and forth, they traded, they married, they mixed. The Nile Valley ran through what is now Egypt and Sudan, and further south into deep Africa. And the people who lived across all of that land, from the Nile all the way into Canaan and beyond into Arabia, were the same family of people. Dark skin, African features, African blood. The map we use today was not always the map. Maps are made by people. And when powerful people take over a region, one of the first things they do is rename things, redraw borders, change the story of who lived where. The map of the Middle East as a separate thing from Africa is a modern map, a colonial era map. Before that, the ancient world did not see Africa and the Middle East as two different worlds. They were one continuous civilization, connected by land, connected by blood, connected by culture. This matters because Moses came from that world, not the modern Middle East of today, the ancient connected world, the world where the lines between Africa and Arabia had not yet been cut. Now let us go deeper. Moses was an Israelite. We all know that. But what does Israelite actually mean in terms of blood and skin? Where did these people come from? Israel was the name given to a man named Jacob. Jacob was the grandson of Abraham, and Abraham came from a place called Ur, which sits in what is now Iraq and southern Mesopotamia. This region, ancient Mesopotamia, was populated by dark-skinned Semitic and Cushite peoples. Scholars of ancient Near Eastern history have pointed to early Mesopotamian art and tomb figures that showed dark brown and black-skinned peoples. These were not Europeans who happened to wander into the desert. These were ancient people with African roots, closely connected to the civilizations of Northeast Africa. Jacob, who became Israel, had 12 sons. Those 12 sons became the 12 tribes of Israel. One of those sons was a man named Levi. Levi is the direct ancestor of Moses. So let us look at Levi. Let us really look at him. Levi was born to Jacob and a woman named Leah. Now this is where it gets interesting and where most people stop digging. Leah was the daughter of a man named Laban. Laban lived in a place called Haran, which sits in what is now southern Turkey near the Syrian border. Haran was a crossroads city, a place where traders passed through, a place with ancient Semitic populations. And Laban himself, in the original Hebrew text, is described as an Aramaean. Aramaean. That word means he belonged to an Aramaic-speaking Semitic peoples. And the early Aramaeans, the original ones, were not the light-skinned people we might imagine today. Ancient Semitic populations in this region were dark. They were the same racial family as the Cushites, the Egyptians, the early Arabs. Laban was not a pale man with blonde hair. He was a dark-skinned man of the ancient Near East. His daughter Leah was therefore dark. Her skin was the skin of her father. Her blood was the blood of that land. And she gave that blood to Levi. Now let us talk about the Arabs, because this is where so many people lose the thread. When people say Arab today, they often imagine the modern Arab person, someone from Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Lebanon. And yes, the modern Arab world today has a wide range of skin tones because of thousands of years of migration, invasion, intermarriage with Greeks, Romans, Persians, Turks, European colonizers. The modern Arab world today looks very different from the Arab world of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. The original Arabs were black people. I am not saying this to be provocative. I am saying this because ancient sources say it. Ancient Greek historians described the early Arabs and the people of ancient Arabia Felix, the southern Arabian Peninsula, as dark-skinned. The ancient Nabateans, who built Petra, were described by Greek and Roman writers as having dark complexions. The early Yemeni kingdoms, the Sabaeans, the Himyarites, these were brown and black-skinned peoples with close cultural and genetic ties to the Horn of Africa, to Ethiopia, to Sudan. Southern Arabia and East Africa were the same world. The Red Sea, which separates them today, was not a barrier, it was a highway. People crossed it regularly. They intermarried. They shared languages, religions, farming techniques, architectural styles. The ancient kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia had colonies in Yemen. Arab traders lived along the Swahili coast of Africa. These were not two separate races. They were one extended family spread across a narrow body of water. And Laban, as an Aramaean of the ancient Near East, was part of this broader world of dark-skinned Semitic peoples connected to Africa. Leah carried that heritage. She passed it to Levi, and Levi passed it down the line. So now follow this chain with me. Laban was dark. His daughter Leah was dark. Leah's son Levi was dark. Levi's descendants settled in Egypt with the rest of Jacob's family. In Egypt, they were surrounded by Africans. They lived among Africans. They were enslaved by Africans. They worked under the sun of Africa for 400 years. They had children with each other inside that African context. There was no outside influence pulling their genetics toward anything light-skinned. From the tribe of Levi came a man named Amram. Amram married a woman named Jochebed, and the Bible says something very specific about Jochebed that most people gloss over. Numbers chapter 26 verse 59 says she was a daughter of Levi, born to Levi in Egypt. So both of Moses' parents were from the same tribe. Both carried the Levite bloodline. Both were deeply rooted inside that 400-year-long African existence. From Amram and Jochebed came Moses. Moses. Let us sit with this man for a moment. Moses was born at a time when the Pharaoh of Egypt had ordered the killing of all Hebrew male babies. The political situation was extreme. His mother hid him for 3 months. Then, when she could no longer hide him, she did something desperate and beautiful and terrifying all at once. She put her baby into a basket made of papyrus and pitch, and she set that basket in the Nile River. Now stop and think about that image. A baby in the Nile, an African river, a basket floating among the reeds of Egypt. This baby was placed there because her mother believed he would survive. She placed her older sister nearby to watch from a distance. The Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe in the Nile. She found the basket, she opened it, and she saw the child. Here is what the text says. In Exodus chapter 2, verse 6, it says she saw the baby and had compassion for him. She said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." She could tell. Looking at the child, she could identify him as Hebrew. Now think about what that means. If Moses had looked like the Egyptian paintings we are shown in churches and movies today, a pale or medium-toned child, why would the Pharaoh's daughter be able to pick him out as Hebrew? The Egyptians and the Hebrews looked similar enough that Moses later in life could pass as Egyptian. But even as a baby, there was something about him she could recognize. The Hebrews and the Egyptians were the same racial type, dark-skinned Afro-Asiatic peoples.
Both groups were brown and black. The distinction was cultural, tribal, linguistic, not a dramatic skin color difference, which means Moses looked like the Egyptians around him because both groups looked like Africans. Now here is where Moses' story gets even more powerful. Pharaoh's daughter adopted him. She raised him in the palace. She gave him an Egyptian education. Moses grew up inside the most powerful African empire on earth. He learned Egyptian writing, Egyptian religion, Egyptian military strategy, Egyptian law. He was raised as a prince of Egypt. There is a story in the book of Acts in the New Testament, chapter 7, where Stephen gives a long speech about Israelite history. He said Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. A Hebrew baby raised as an Egyptian prince, fully integrated, fully educated, fully at home in that African palace. And then, one day, something shifts in him. He went out and saw his people being beaten. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and something in him, some deep blood memory of who he was, rose up. He killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. He was defending his people, a man raised in the palace, raised with every privilege, choosing the side of the enslaved. When that act became known, he fled Egypt. He ran to a place called Midian. Midian. Let us talk about Midian for a moment, because this is important. Midian was a region in the northwestern Arabian Peninsula, in what is today northwest Saudi Arabia and the southern tip of Jordan. It was populated by Midianite peoples, who were descended from Midian, a son of Abraham by his second wife, Keturah. So the Midianites were also Semitic peoples, cousins of the Israelites. And geographically, Midian is right there on the edge of Africa, right there on the border of the Arabian Peninsula where it meets the Sinai and Egypt. When Moses arrived in Midian, he sat down by a well. A group of daughters came to the well to water their flocks. Some shepherds tried to drive the women away. Moses stood up and drove the shepherds away and watered the flocks for the women. The women went home. Their father asked them how they had returned so quickly. They told him an Egyptian man had helped them. An Egyptian. That is what the daughters of Midian called Moses. They looked at this man and they saw an Egyptian, not a foreigner, not someone distinctly different from the people of that land. They saw an Egyptian. You do not mistake a person's identity unless they look like the people of that land. Moses looked like an Egyptian, and Egyptians looked like Africans. The father of these women was a priest of Midian named Reuel, also called Jethro. He invited Moses to stay. Moses married one of his daughters, a woman named Zipporah, and Zipporah was Midianite. She was from that ancient Arabian African borderland. She was dark. Moses built a life there. He worked as a shepherd for his father-in-law. He had children. He lived in the desert, under the sun, in the land between Arabia and Africa. And then, one day, on a mountain, he saw a bush that burned but was not consumed, and everything changed. Here is something about Moses that does not get enough attention. When God spoke to Moses from the burning bush and told him to go back to Egypt to free the Israelites, Moses was afraid. He made excuses. He said, "Who am I to do this?" He said, "I am slow of speech." He pushed back. He asked God to send someone else. Does that sound like a hero out of a Hollywood movie? No, it sounds like a real man, a man with fear in him, a man who had been through things. He had grown up in a palace and then become a fugitive. He had killed a man. He had run away. He had spent years in the desert far from everything he knew. He was not a man full of confidence and shine. He was a man who had been broken down and put back together by life. That is a human being. That is not a movie character. That is a person. And God said to him, "I will be with you. I will give you the words. Your brother Aaron will speak with you. Go." And Moses went. He went back to Egypt, a man in his 80s, some texts suggest, walking back into the empire that had wanted to kill him as a baby, walking back to the Pharaoh's palace where he had grown up, walking back into that world as a free man with a mission. Think about the courage that takes. Think about the weight of it. He stood before Pharaoh. He performed signs. He brought plagues. He stood firm through every pushback, every hardship, every moment when the Israelites themselves doubted him and turned against him. He did not quit. And eventually, after 10 plagues, after darkness and locusts and death visited the land, Pharaoh let the people go. Moses led somewhere between 600,000 and 2 million people out of Egypt, on foot, into the desert, into the Sinai, toward a land they had never seen. He was their leader, their judge, their lawgiver. He climbed Sinai and received the Torah. He spoke face to face with God, and when he came back down, his face was shining with light. Shining so bright that the people were afraid to come near him, and he had to cover his face with a veil. A man whose face shone like the sun, an African man, a black man, a man born from Levi, born from Leah, born from Laban the Aramean, their ancient dark-skinned Semitic peoples. The Arabs of that time were black. The Israelites who went into Egypt were already a dark-skinned people. 400 years in Africa made that even more certain. Amram and Jochebed were both Levites. Their son Moses was born black, raised in an African palace among black people, and lived his whole life in and around Africa. The truth was always there. You just had to look past the paintings. If this opened something in you, if this made you think, if this made you want to dig deeper into the real ancient history of these people and these stories, please subscribe to this channel. Share this video, not because of numbers, because this kind of information needs to reach people who are ready for it. Your cousin who has questions, your friend who grew up in church but always felt like something was off, your child who is learning about the Bible and deserves the real picture. Share it. Let it travel. Let the truth go where it needs to go. And drop in the comments what you think. What did this change for you? What do you want to know more about? Because we're just getting started.